In the summer of 1984, on remote Beechey Island in Arctic Canada, an archaeological team struck into the permafrost and uncovered something extraordinary. Staring back at them, perfectly preserved, was the face of a young sailor. His skin was intact, his features serene, as if frozen in sleep. His name was John Torrington, a 20-year-old Royal Navy stoker who had died on January 1, 1846. More than a century later, his body lay in the ice with the canvas burial cloth still neatly folded across his chest. It was an eerie, visceral time capsule, breaking 138 years of Arctic silence and opening a story frozen in time. For centuries, the fate of Sir John Franklin's final expedition has been one of history's most haunting mysteries. Tonight, we follow the trail from that first discovery, this frozen sailor, through to the latest findings of science and history. Join us as we separate fact from fiction in one of the greatest maritime mysteries of all time. As the archaeologists exhumed Torrington's grave, each detail was astonishing. His body had been preserved like the famous Tollund man from ancient Denmark. In the dim Arctic light, his eyes appeared partially open, giving the unsettling impression that he had only recently been laid to rest. His discovery cast a spotlight on Franklin's expedition. If the first victim lay so intact, what had become of the other 128 officers and men who had set sail with him? The Franklin expedition was a national enterprise. In May 1845, two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, departed England under the command of Sir John Franklin, with 129 men eventually venturing into the Arctic. These vessels were state-of-the-art polar explorers, bomb ships with hulls more than 2 feet thick, fitted with powerful steam engines and strengthened with iron to batter through sea ice. Victorian newspapers boasted that nothing could stop them, that these floating fortresses would dominate the Arctic. But if those ships were so robust, what unseen force could turn them into icy tombs? Sir John Franklin was a seasoned Arctic veteran. By 1845, he had circumnavigated the globe and survived previous polar winters. As he sailed from England, the expedition was a national spectacle of confidence. But a silent threat lurked in their stores. Much of the food was packed in tin cans sealed with lead solder, and even their plumbing ran through lead pipes. Beatty's team later found that Franklin's men had high levels of lead in their bones. For years, people wondered if lead poisoning doomed the voyage. Modern analysis shows lead was widespread in Victorian life, and it likely only weakened some of the crew by aggravating disease and confusion. But it was not the sole villain of this story. In late July 1845, Erebus and Terror slipped into Lancaster Sound, the gateway to the Northwest Passage. They were seen by whalers who passed along hearty greetings, the last contact Franklin's men had with the world for months. But the Arctic answered back swiftly. Summer passed. By September, towering pressure ridges and swirling pack ice had closed around the ships. Steam funnels clogged with rime, boilers cooled, and the men realized the voyage had come to a sudden halt. They were trapped in a frozen vice. As the brief summer surrendered to winter, the crew was plunged into a desperate struggle. Locked in the ice for 19 months, they endured the brutal, isolating extremes of the polar night. They hunted seal and polar bear, rationed their provisions, and maintained their routines as best they could. Still, scurvy and pneumonia began to spread. The lack of sunlight and fresh vegetables took its toll, and disease gnawed at them. Even Sir John Franklin himself fell ill and died on June 11, 1847. Yet the officers kept discipline and hope alive. In the spring of 1848, they erected a cairn at Victory Point with a handwritten note. It began calmly. Sir John Franklin died 11th June 1847. The rest of the expedition left the ships 22nd April 1848. The contrast was striking. Less than a year earlier, the expedition had projected confidence and order. Now, the note revealed a very different reality. 24 men dead, 2 ships abandoned, and 105 survivors beginning a desperate march into the Arctic wilderness. When rescuers finally found that note in 1859, it answered one question. The ships had been abandoned, but it raised many more. Why had Franklin's crew deserted their ships at the height of spring? Some have pointed out that many of the officers died early and speculated about foul play. However, there is no evidence of mutiny or violence in any diary or Inuit account. Instead, all records suggest the men simply collapsed under exhaustion and starvation. Even Captain Francis Crozier later noted that everyone was sick and weak. The Arctic had worn them down, not some secret conspiracy. And so, on April 22, 1848, the 105 remaining survivors set out on the ice. It was a final, desperate gamble. They hauled behind them the ship's lifeboats, each weighing some 800 pounds, across the frozen land. To us, dragging so much weight when every step was agony seems impossible. But perhaps they still clung to hope that reaching open water could save them. They packed pemmican and bread and even carried personal items, warm clothing, letters, books, as if preparing for a long journey. In those final days, the line between routine and survival blurred. Inuit hunters saw some of Franklin's men out there on the ice. They spoke of gaunt figures offering pieces of cooked meat in exchange for food. Many survivors were so emaciated that their clothes hung loosely off them. To many Victorians back in England, the idea that British officers could resort to cannibalism was unthinkable. But the Arctic does not lie. Decades later, bone fragments were found on King William Island with cut marks from butchery. The combined evidence of Inuit oral history and forensic analysis made one truth clear. Some of Franklin's men did eat the dead to survive. In 1997, archaeologists recovered additional remains from King William Island, shedding further light on the crew's grim final days. The forensic evidence was stark. Rank offered no escape from this brutal reality. Bones were found precisely cut, indicating they had been defleshed after death. In other words, the officers and common sailors alike succumbed to the same tragic end. By the close of their march, all rank and discipline had dissolved on that frozen plain. For 170 years, Erebus and Terror themselves were thought lost. Many assumed they had been crushed against the island's shore. But in 2014, that legend was rewritten. An underwater expedition located HMS Erebus in Queen Maud Gulf, far to the south of where she had been abandoned. 2 years later, HMS Terror was discovered in Terror Bay, even further south. The distant resting places of these wrecks raised a profound historical question. Did the shifting ice carry these ghost ships over the years, or did a desperate few return to the helm? Divers have since explored the wrecks and recovered poignant artifacts, tools, pipes, even a family Bible on a captain's desk. Each artifact tells part of the story, but the final moments aboard remain an enduring mystery. After April 1848, the exact sequence of events is lost to the ice, leaving us to wonder who or what ultimately carried the ships on. Today, John Torrington's peaceful face still emerges from the ice as a silent witness. This young sailor's frozen gaze reminds us that history is made of real people in impossible circumstances. Each clue found, a carved note, a butchered bone, a sunken ship, edges us closer to the truth. Yet in the Arctic's vast silence, many questions remain. Torrington's calm face stands as a timeless reminder of those men and their fate, and of the unanswered questions that still drift over Franklin's last voyage.